things I think we want to try to accomplish. First, I'm going to start out trying to frame the radical importance of guaranteed income as an economic justice tool. Secondly, Jeff, who's currently a foundation fellow here at the Eastern Bank Foundation and former senior economist at the Boston Federal Reserve, will bring an economist perspective on guaranteed income to put its promise into broader context. And then finally, Jessica Ridge, whom I consider among the national experts and leaders in the movement, will help us to understand what guaranteed income looks like locally and highlight some of its early results. So is everybody good with that? All right. So let me give a little bit of my personal history in this work. And maybe the reason that my name comes up is just that I'm a gadfly on this. And so I think I keep getting drawn to the light of guaranteed income. So I'm grateful that people recognize my interest in the space. But what first drew me to guaranteed income as a family economic sustainability and inequality solution was a 2014 Federal Reserve of Chicago report that highlighted the weak link between educational attainment and economic mobility. At the time, I was just beginning my tenure as the chief of education for the city of Boston, and the Fed findings at once validated what I think we all know but don't fully acknowledge, and what former State Secretary for Education Paul Reville has always argued, that education alone is not enough to overcome the effects of poverty. The Fed findings also reframed for me a great part of my mission in city government. So if poverty is the problem, why do we keep telling people to cling to the uncertainty of educational attainment? Instead, let's flip it and solve families' resource problems to unleash learning, and do so in a way that honors their struggle and enhances their independence by making resources unrestricted, no strings attached. By the time I left government in 2018, at least half of the initiatives that I was working on aimed to attack poverty more directly as a way to improve a broad spectrum of outcomes for children and families. This work included a partnership with Family Independence Initiative, now Up Together, and the State Department of Transitional Assistance to test FII's model and guaranteed income as a substitute for more traditional financial assistance. The development of the Family-Led Stability Pilot was also a part of this work, and this was an effort that partnered local nonprofits, including Higher Ground and Project Hope, with Boston Public Schools, the city, and state housing departments and private developers to identify and permanently house 200 homeless BPS families closer to their children's schools in Roxbury and Dorchester. And finally, this work included universal pre-K in Boston, which, among other things, aimed to create a system for early education that would defray early care costs for families that can exceed the cost of college tuition. I was and I am convinced, particularly in light of the 2015 Color of Wealth study and the early promise of these initiatives, that the most urgent reparative work, the most urgent economic justice work to be done is to explore scaled income and wealth transfer initiatives that will both help to create greater household economic stability for families living with low income and to create resource autonomy for families to be self-determining. My wife, Mariama White-Hammond, and I got to act further on this conviction in 2019 when we partnered with Camp Harborview to explore approaches to address Boston's racial wealth gap. This work led to an incredibly promising guaranteed income initiative that Jessica Ridge will tell us more about. As importantly, it led to an insight and hypothesis about guaranteed income that was framed by a friend and colleague, Nirav Dagli, who had volunteered his team at Spinnaker Analytics in the Back Bay to help us learn from Camp Harborview families and to explore solutions with them and the Camp Harborview team. Adapting the language of aeronautics and rocket telemetry to the work that we were doing, Nirav declared that what we are trying to do is to help families of color achieve escape velocity. In rocket science, the concept refers to the amount of force and speed a rocket needs to gain to break free from the Earth's orbit. As applied to our thinking about guaranteed income, we came to define escape velocity as the amount of capital resources directed toward and the rate of investment in families needed to build resources, eliminate disposable income and savings deficits, and grow financial surpluses at an accelerated pace in order to rapidly escape cycles of financial instability or the gravitational pull of poverty. Long definition, but I'm going to read it to you again because I think the concept is important. Escape velocity is the amount of capital resources directed toward and the rate of investment in families needed to build resources, eliminate disposable income and savings deficits, and grow financial surpluses at an accelerated rate in order to escape the gravitational pull of poverty. Part of the insight here is that families are always working towards stability and often making marginal progress that's subverted by unforeseen calamity, wages failing to rise at the rate of inflation, or the many permutations of structural racism, bringing them back to a state of insecurity that they've been working harder than you and I have ever had to work to still fail to escape seemingly permanent lack. But I don't think that it has to be this way. And I think we have several tools at our disposal, including guaranteed income, to ensure families and individuals a different future. If you take nothing else away from my remarks today, understand that I'm arguing that guaranteed income has unique escape velocity potential that we need to continue to explore and test. That said, let me offer a few additional remarks to hopefully accomplish three things. First, to dispel some early false conclusions about guaranteed income. Secondly, to suggest some strategic applications for guaranteed income, particularly in Boston and Greater Boston. And finally, to propose some critical roles for philanthropy in the movement. As it has to do with emerging false conclusions, first, I'd like to push back on the growing conclusion that guaranteed income is a short-term emergency solution that only addresses immediate and desperate needs. Guaranteed income does do this, full stop. However, we know from research in Stockton, California, Jackson, Mississippi, Minneapolis, Minnesota, among up-together families across the country, that it relieves a number of financial pressures. It helps to mitigate the opportunity costs associated with poverty and creates the space for families to more planfully invest in their futures. As such, catalyzing longer-term economic stability and independence that we need to continue to monitor and confirm. Secondly, no one is arguing that guaranteed income is a silver bullet, but we are arguing that it is a powerful tool for scaled capital transfer and a relatively economic way to support household economic stability on a per household basis. It's a tool that, when combined with things like housing affordability interventions, equitable capital investment in BIPOC small businesses, and various forms of debt relief, contributes to raising the income floor for many and creating a stronger foundation for longer-term stability. Third, our anxiety about the expense of guaranteed income is understandable, but I do think it's misplaced. We are already paying more to address the same challenges through food and housing assistance, healthcare costs, and the increasing evolution of schools as multi-service institutions. And we're doing so without actually addressing economic inequity directly, and certainly not at its roots. So if you think that there's nothing left to test or to learn, as some have asserted, or you doubt guaranteed income's viability, then we should think again. The R&D phase for guaranteed income is not close to over, and early promise requires further exploration, testing, and maybe most importantly, follow through, because we are already changing the trajectory of people's lives. We absolutely have to test the theory of escape velocity to better understand what intensity of resource is required to break a family free from the gravity of poverty. And to adequately test this, we have to continue to imagine guaranteed income's applications and equity potential. Let me suggest a few ways that we might evolve guaranteed income here at home in strategic and targeted ways. First, guaranteed income could work like real estate linkage or pilot in Boston across sectors where disproportionate rates of worker displacement due to downsizing and automation could combine with college tuition assistance and workforce training dollars to ensure that reskilling and upskilling workers can effectively change career lanes with financial security. Similarly, we could target sectors, subsectors, and companies where there's little evidence of inclusive hiring, ensuring that a set of compensatory resources are generated for the most affected people in our economy, while sending a signal and incentivizing employers to do better. Guaranteed income could work as an income support in sectors serving a public purpose, like early childhood development, where we know market salaries fall well below the living wage despite our reliance on the sector for economic productivity and growth. For early educators in particular, we can see promising signs of increased compensation through policy in the next several years, and guaranteed income could serve as a bridge to that raise, eliminating the waiting time. Guaranteed income could be a reparative investment in communities and groups who have not only fallen behind, but who've historically been excluded from economic opportunity. As for instance, Boston's Reparations Task Force considers its first steps. Guaranteed income could be an initial good faith investment in any number of irrefutably deserving communities as it continues to determine its grander designs for recourse related to racial justice. Finally, guaranteed income could and should be tested in combination with other programs, subsidies, and employer initiatives to identify the powerful combinations of interventions that guarantee the achievement of escape velocity. So where does philanthropy fit into this? I would argue that philanthropy is needed more now than ever to sustain a movement that is a critical part of the modern anti-poverty dialogue. To show up most effectively, though, philanthropy has to see itself as an R&D investor, a risk taker, seeding new approaches to capital transfer and moving beyond current frames to explore new possibilities for economic democracy. This flies in the face of current impact investing and the notion that what we are most concerned about in philanthropy are proven solutions. Invention is still needed to find powerful anti-poverty and wealth gap closing solutions. The public sector seems to be, if not unconvinced about it, maybe even retreating from it. And the market is, well, the market. As grant makers, presumably mission and justice driven and inherent transfers of capital, we have unique opportunities to first elevate, refine, and test the theory of escape velocity. If there is credence to the theory and to guaranteed income as an essential tool in promoting it, this is something that we need to own and run with to make the concept core to our strategic framing, our messaging, and our advocacy. Philanthropy also needs to continue to fuel the laboratories. If we're in agreement that we're not nearly at the end of the R&D phase, we need to keep funding and learning from the laboratories and organizations leading the efforts to help us understand what systematic approaches might look like. Specifically, we need to keep probing questions around amounts, resource intensity, and understanding the value add of unrestricted dollars compared to welfare-oriented subsidy. And finally, we need to help create public-private structures to enable and support guaranteed income. If the public sector has some reticence about it and reticence about the need for more R&D and guaranteed income's expense, we may need to both incentivize government to join the movement and use our dollars to do some de-risking of the investment. In the process of taking the role of lead investor, at least at this stage in the movement, part of our work should be to create the cross-sector containers and systems that could make guaranteed income a whole society investment, pulling appropriate capital from sources across the economy, public and private, to more fully include communities living with low income, in the country's prosperity, and certainly in the economic growth that Boston and New England have seen over the last couple of decades.